let's enable the shooting particle and do a fist. And we can see it shoots out, as expected. And if I stop doing a fist, it'll stop. If I toggle it off, it'll also stop. Shotgun. Works fine. Hi there. This is going to be a guide on how to use particles with VRChat, various tips and tricks, and how to get started with it. I'll go through settings and things that are good to know when animating particles in a VRChat manner. I won't go too in depth on how to create very visually appealing particles. This will be more technical. If you want something on the more visual aspect, there's plenty of guides online. But there's lots of things with VRChat that isn't really explained elsewhere, which I'll go through. First of all, you will want to have a project with an avatar in it. I have my avatar here in the scene, and there's not really much else in the project aside from Poyomi shader, which we won't really be using here. First of all, something that will help us in the long run, I want to create a floor for the avatar. So I'll right click in the hierarchy, and I'll go and create a 3D object and a plane. And it'll not be where we want it. We want to put it at 0, 0, 0. And I can use the R key on my keyboard and scale it up real far so we get it nice and large. We have a little lighting thing here. If you have gizmos, the little gizmos button here, you'll be able to see various interactable things. If you don't have a light object, you're gonna need to create a directional light. We do that by right clicking, light, and directional light. And this one just changes the lighting of the sun. Want it slightly dim so we can see, but not too dark either. Alright, so the first thing we want to do to get started is we can right click, and then under effects we can create a particle system. And the particle system will be somewhere in front of your camera. Let's put it at 0, 0, 0, rotation 0. W key to move tool. We'll just move it in front of the thing here. Now, what I like to do is ensure that always refresh is on. This will be useful for various effects. And I want to turn off selection outline so we can see the particles a little bit better. Make sure you have gizmos on so we can see the details of the particle system as well. First, let's go over some important settings that are useful to know. Under shape, we can change the way the particle emits. By default, it'll be a cone with the angle of 25. So let's just change that to a 0 angle with a radius of 0. We have a straight particle with no variation. I'm also going to change the start size a little bit. Under here, start size, we can either use the mouse to drag across here by left clicking, or we can type in a number. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, mostly because by default the particle is very large. Before we get into making it do what we would like to do, we can look into some important settings. Simulation space is very important. Let's see what happens when I rotate the particle. All the particles follow with the rotation. If I were to change simulation space to world, now we'll notice that the particles fly independent of the rotation. You will use world for most particles, but sometimes you might use local. If the particle looks like this, you can just click restart to play it again. Another important setting that will show up in the avatar stats is max particles. By default, it will always be 1000. Down here in the particle window, we can see there are currently 50 particles alive, roughly 50. So we want to ensure when we are done with the particle at least, the max particles should stay around the max amount of particles that are alive at all times, or maybe even less. Generally, I'd like to say that 200 particles is a pretty good limit to have on one system. So let's just put it at 200 for now. Another very important setting when it comes to VRChat is the scaling mode. We always want it to be hierarchy. The reason for this is that's just how scaling functions. As in, if it is a child of something else, it'll scale along the whole hierarchy and not be independent. This will just ensure that scaling is consistent. So you always want to change scaling mode to hierarchy. Another few settings is for billboard particles, which is, if we pause it here, a billboard particle is just a texture that is facing the camera always. One setting called allow roll is always checked on by default. What this means is, for example, in VR, you can turn your head sideways, and if allow roll is on, the texture will rotate with your head. Now this will look kind of weird sometimes. You don't necessarily want that on always. Usually I like to turn allow roll off, because generally we don't want the particle to rotate with the head. We want it to stay independent. Additionally, under the very bottom here on the renderer, there's light probes and reflection probes. We want to put these to blend probes. This is mostly important when it comes to mesh particles, which we'll get into later. That will just ensure more consistent lighting. Now that we've gotten most of those settings done, there's still a couple of things more, but for that we'll need to create a material for our particle. There's a default material used, just the default texture that Unity gives, but we want it to look special. So let's right click in the assets folder, create a new folder, and let's call it particle. Here I have a bunch of particle textures. When it comes to figuring out what textures you can and should use for particles, the general idea is a black and white image, where black will be transparent and white will be what the particle looks like, and it can be colored. You can also have particle textures that are already colored, but if you want to change the color in the settings within Unity, you'll be more constrained to what the particle color is. Generally, you want it to be white and black, unless, for example, the particle needs to look like something specific, like dirt. For this, we'll use, let's say, I want a little glowy one, and maybe we'll have some kind of explosion type particle. So I'm gonna drag these in here. You can either make your own image files or find online. Image files for particles can also be transparent, but generally I would recommend a black background. It's a little bit more versatile. When you have them in Unity, we want to ensure that they will be transparent, so select them. Up here in alpha source, we'll check from grayscale and check on alpha is transparency and click apply, and we'll now see they're transparent. If the image file was already transparent and white by default, you simply just want to have input texture alpha instead with alpha is transparency. But with a black background, we use from grayscale. Additionally, these texture files are very large by default. We can see they take up 1.3 megabyte space. This is way too large. We don't need that. So I'll just select them both and check on max size and make them a lot smaller. 256 is pretty fine for these. And we can see they immediately take a lot less space, and the visual quality won't change too much for these. Now let's create a material form. I'll right click, create, material. And we'll use the default particle shader from Unity. So we'll click the material here and go to particles, standard unlit. And let's drag in the little glowy one here in albedo. Albedo is the texture that it uses. And rendering mode should be fade in this case, and then it'll be transparent. And we can just simply drag that onto the particle in the scene, or what a little bit easier probably. Click the particle system. On the renderer, there's the material slot right here. We'll drag it in. Let's name it global. Now if we open the particle system again, click restart, we can see it uses the new texture. If we click the particle here, by the standard particle shader can change color here. I think I would like it to glow, so let's turn on emission. And we can use the same particle sprite as the emission. and let's make it red glow. We can change the intensity as well. By default, Unity won't have any post-processing, so we can't actually really see the emission. So let's remedy that. We'll go to Window, Package Manager, and then we'll have the Unity registry. And let's find post-processing. We'll search it, post-processing, and let's install it. Alright, post-processing has been installed. Let's set it up for our camera. You should have a camera in your hierarchy somewhere. This is what is used as the game camera. Let's go add component and post-processing layer. We'll make the layer to everything. We'll change mode to fast approximate, and then we'll click add component, post-processing volume. Let's check on is global. Generally, you don't really need to know what these settings do. Mostly I don't even myself. That's fine. We'll create a new profile here. We'll add effect, auto exposure. We'll add some color grading and bloom. We'll check on all of these. Under color grading, let's check them all on. Mode will change to aces. Check on, check on, check on. And then on the bloom, check this, and this. 30, intensity 2, just 0, 8, and that should be it. We can close these, and if we click on the material again, go to the emission here, and we can turn up the intensity. We'll now see the bloom be more visible, and this will give us a more accurate representation of what it could look like in game. Now, not all worlds have the same post-processing, but this is just a general good reference. The post-processing we added in Unity here will have no effect on how it is in game. This is just purely for visual reference. If you want to turn it off again, you can simply just check these off. But it's a good way of ensuring that our bloom levels don't get too high. But let's have it at like 3 intensity here, maybe 2.5. We got a pretty nice glow here. Something else very important when it comes to billboard particles. Billboard particles will always face you, so they will kind of like look at me. But when it comes to VRChat, there's things like mirrors. And if a particle is in the mirror, it will face your mirror self, which is not you. aka it will show the invisible side of the particle. Now this is just a thing with 3D models and stuff, is there's culling. If you, my avatar's outlines, but basically the other side of this mesh is invisible to save on processing power. And so is the particles here. You just never usually see it. So to fix that, we basically just enable two-sided. This just means that the back side of the particle is also rendered. And this will make them visible in mirrors. In other shaders like Poyomi, it just means turning culling off, usually near the bottom of the settings. There's also settings like soft particles, which just makes it so particles near edges of something will kind of fade out, but this won't be visible unless you use something like a depth light. Now we won't really be using that, so you don't really have to worry about it. Just generally, I wouldn't recommend soft particles too much anyways. They are very sort of inconsistent in general. Playback speed back to 1 here. Alright, now we're basically ready to talk about how to emit particles. Now currently our particle system is not on our avatar, So we should probably start doing that now that we want to animate it. Let's drag it on here. Now, let's say I want to shoot stuff from my hands. There's a couple ways we can do it. We can either drag the particle directly on my hand armature. The only downside to this is, in case you want to be like me, I like to make things prefabs so I can put it on other avatars, etc. You generally don't want to place stuff directly on the armature that you will be animating. Let's say I'm going to be animating how many I shoot and stuff. The way animations work in Unity is that if I were to animate this, Unity will look at the naming of all these to know where it is. If I were to rename hand to wrist, like it is on some avatars, then the animation will be broken. There's a way around this though. We go to our main hierarchy of our avatar. Let's create a new empty object. An empty object is just technically nothing. We'll call it a container. And this thing will contain our particle system. Let's put the particle at 0, 0, 0. And on the container here, we'll add a component and we'll type in parent constraint. Parent constraint is very handy. It will just kind of constrain something to something else. And in this case, we will open where it says sources, click plus, and we'll constrain to a hand. Now let's be a little bit smarter here. We'll also create a new object on our hand. We'll call it particle hand R. We'll drag it into the source, and then we'll click 0 to make it to be exactly where this thing is. So now our particle system is here. Let's see if we can. The container is stuck here, and the particle is attached to the container, which is attached to the hand. If we were to rotate the animation to point outwards from our hand like so, and we can go to play mode to basically see this as well. It will have the particle follow our hand now. We can see the emits from our hand, and if we were to rotate our arm, it'll follow our arm as well. Even though it's technically not attached directly on our armature, it still moves with it. And that's exactly what we want. Because now that it's not on our armature, it's down here, we can animate it as much as we want, and it'll be modular enough to be ported to different avatars very easily with minimal issues. Let's rename the container here to container particle test, so we have a better naming scheme. Well, we don't necessarily want the particle to look like this or animate like this. Let's move it down a little bit. There's a few ways you can emit a particle. By default, under the emission tab, it will be rate over time. This just means it's a continuous rate. Here it's like a 10 per second, I think it is. If we increase this to 20, it'll be twice as fast, etc. And we can increase that as well. We can also lower it, and it'll be a lot less. There's rate over distance. What this will do is it'll only emit when it's being moved. And then finally there are burst, which we need to click the plus for. And let's say 5. If you click restart, it shoots 5 particles. They're all stacked on top of each other here. If we don't want them to be stacked on top of each other, let's say give it some angle here. You can see it a little bit better. You know, it's kind of like a shotgun. And every time we click restart, it'll do this again. Now, there's a few consequences to how we animate a burst particle, which I will go into, because they're a little bit different to animate than in normal emission over time. But we'll get into that. For this example, let's say we want one of each type of particle system. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to, on the emission here, we'll go back to the this thing here. So now we have a burst and a continuous one. Let's edit the continuous one a little bit. Lifetime is a little bit too long. Let's put it to 2 seconds. We can make the speed a lot higher. Let's put it to 15. They fly up a lot faster. Right now they fly through the ground. Let's say we don't want them to fly through the ground. Under the settings there's collision. Check that on. And on the type it's defaulted to planes. We want this to be world. Now we can see they start bouncing off the floor we made earlier. Let's say we don't want them to bounce, but we want them to die immediately as they hit. We can dampen them first. This means they just stop instead of bouncing. And then we can, under lifetime loss, we'll put a number 1 here. That means they lose all of their life as soon as they hit. If we put it to 0.5, for example, they lose half of their current life, which is 1 second. But we want it to die immediately. If we go underground here, we'll see they no longer pass through the floor. Also importantly, we have radius scale. This is basically the hitbox size of the particles. It's a little hard to see, but the particles kind of died just shortly before hitting the ground. If we put this to 0, then the hitbox basically become super tiny, and we can see they die about halfway through hitting the ground here. This will just kind of change how accurate the hitbox is. Under this setting here, send collision messages. Generally, I would kind of check that on. This is a little bit of a niche setting. Some worlds use it to, for example, detect if a particle has hit a target or something. Like some shooting range worlds will check for that, and it will make the particle actually interact with it. There's no real downside to turning this on, so I'll leave it on. Let's just reduce clutter by turning off the other particle system real quick. There we go. Alright, let's go into subemitters. Let's say these particles, when they hit the ground, they should explode. That's why we have the other particle here. Let's create another material. We can't just duplicate the other one. Control D to duplicate it. And let's drag in the texture for it right here. So let's think about what can an explosion look like. There's maybe like a little radius that extends outwards and goes back in, and maybe a few sparks. So let's try and create that. First, we'll create a new particle effect. Let's first create the little explosion. We'll make it a sphere. We'll make it a super small radius. And let's give it our new material on the renderer. We'll give it the global number 1 here. Now we don't want them to fly away, so we'll give them a start speed of 0, so they stay still, and a lifetime of maybe half of a second. It's not a rate over time, this will be a burst, because the explosion happens once, but not continuously. So in this case, if I put the burst at 1, it'll only explode once here. Now you can see it kind of keeps playing here. That's because looping is enabled, and it loops every 5 seconds. For this, we'll just turn off looping, and that will not continue. We can see every time I click restart, it does that. Now an explosion kind of extends outwards, so let's scroll down to a thing called size over lifetime. Very handy. This is using a little curve here. So if I just click restart with that enabled, we can see it extends outwards. It'll be 0 at the start of its lifetime and 100 at the end of its lifetime. Let's we can use one of the pre-made curves down here, or we can edit ourselves. I want to use this one. In fact, I kind of wanna make a curve maybe somewhat like this. We'll make it go down again near the end, like this, and then it explodes. Let's make it an even shorter lifetime. And just as an example, that's good for now. Before we continue, just call this explosion. Now, to make this particle part of the other system, we'll make it a child here, and we'll call this shooting. And under the shooting particle, we'll go to subemitters, check it on, and here we have a choice. We can subemit on birth, collision, death, trigger, or manual. In this particular case, it'll be on the death of the particle, which is when it hits the thing. It could also be on collision in this case, but we'll just use death. We'll drag our explosion into here, and now we can see they explode every time they hit. Now, to make particles feel a bit more unique or special, randomness is very good for that. To enable or to build in randomness in your particle, you can, for example, let's say we want to randomize the speed. There's a little arrow here on the side. We can random between two constants. Could also be curves, but let's just do two constants. It'll give you a new two numbers. Right now it randomizes between speed 5 and 15. Let's say we want it between 10 and maybe 30. If we could put it up here, we can see the particles are already a lot different from each other. We can also make the start size random. So let's do between two constants, and we'll make it a few really small ones and a few really big ones. Maybe a little bit too small there. There we go. And we'll do the same with the explosion as well. The explosion looks very samey. That's not so good. We want to have it look more natural. The explosion could maybe be rotated randomly. Also let's ensure we have the scaling mode to hierarchy. We'll make the simulation space world. Max particles, maybe 50. Blend and light probes here. Allow roll disabled. Alright, we're good. So let's up in the start rotation right here. We'll randomize that between two constants, 0 and 360. And now we can see that the particle is randomly rotating. We can also randomize the size over lifetime. Will be two curves. Now we get another curve in here. So let's say we want one to be more violently upwards to begin with, and someone like this maybe. Oh. There we go. Now we've got a few different sized explosions. We can also change the start size for this. We'll make one a few smaller. And it's starting to look very natural. So let's add a few sparks on the impact as well. To make it easier for ourselves, let's just duplicate the explosion. We'll call it sparks. We'll give it the same texture as the shooting one. And let's put it at 0, 0, 0, and we'll just separate it for now here. And 0 rotation, there we go. If we click restart, it'll look like this because we changed the texture. Let's reset the size over lifetime. We don't want to move that yet. Under the emission, let's say we want maybe 6 sparks to fly out every time it impacts on a burst. We want the shape to still be a sphere, but let's give it some start speed now. 10, a little bit too high. Maybe 5. We'll give it 4. Lifetime should be a little longer. We'll give it between two constants, 1 and 2. They're very big, so let's reduce the max size by a lot. And now they come out a little bit there. They're a little bit survive a little bit too long, so we'll reduce the lifetime again. And start speed, let's make it random. Maybe like between 1 and 3. Let's have the particles become slower. Let's have the particles become smaller over the time of their life. We'll go back to size over lifetime here, and we'll make it just a curve. We can use the default curve for it curving downwards. We'll see they start fading out. We can give them some gravity as well. If we go to gravity modifier here, if we put a number 1, we'll start seeing them fall down immediately. Now we don't have collision on these just yet, so let's give them some. Collision, world, radius scale, put it to 0, and let's have them bounce. We don't want them to bounce fully, so let's dampen them by about 0.4 so they slow down a little bit at the end. Let's give them actually a little bit more lifetime again. And instead of having them die just over these 2 seconds, we can have them lose a bit of life every time they hit the ground. So let's put that to 0.2. So the more they hit the ground, the faster they die. Something like that. I think I want to put up the speed again a little bit. There we go. We can also optionally enable noise. Noise will make them move a little bit more erratically using various noise settings that you can change here. Let's take the strength down a little bit so it's less drastic. Scroll speed will just change how erratic they are, kinda. Frequency, we'll put it to something like that. No, that's way too high. 0.6. Strength even further down. We don't want the noise to be too pronounced here. 0.1. Yeah, something like that. Okay, let's put this on the particle. We'll drag it under the shooting. Click here again. And something you might have noticed, if I were to shoot this up again here, we can see since we put it on def, when the shooting particle dies, they explode. Let's say we only want it to explode when it hits something. So we'll change this to collision instead. And now when they die out here, they'll simply just disappear. Click plus, and under collision we'll add our sparks as well. And now we can see all the little balls explode. I would say that the sparks are a little too big, so let's change the start size to be even smaller. There we go. And let's have it shoot out a few more. 10 maybe. Now this is looking pretty good. Alright, I think I'm happy with how this particle looks. There's a ton of other settings you can mess around with. I won't go too into all these because there are plenty of tutorials on how to make particles look pretty. We are more interested in how to make them functionally work for VRChat. And I think this is a good enough base. We did have the other burst particle system, but it's pretty simple, so we can just delete this. We'll duplicate the shooting here. Let's call it shotgun. Hide the other shooting one. And go to the emission. We'll change this to 0. Let's put this as at 6. And then we'll have like a shotgun type effect. Let's get into animating them. We'll animate the shooting one first. To animate it, we'll create a new animation. So right click, create, animation. We'll call it shooting on. Then we'll hold Ctrl D to duplicate it, F2 to rename it, and let's call this one shooting off. We can select them both by control clicking and select them both. Now to animate it, we want to drag these on top of the avatar's name in the hierarchy and then just drop them on there. It will probably create a new little controller here for you. We can just ignore that for now. So if we click the avatar and we find the animation window, which I have here, but yours might be nested down here. If it isn't, you can just open it here as well and open a new animation window. But since we drag the animation onto our avatar, when we look at the animation window, we can see the two animations are in here. And now we can change them. So if we click record, now any action we do in Unity will be recorded to this animation. And let's say we want this animation obviously to turn the shooting on. Now the shooting is already on. So what we can do is we can go to rate over time, and we can just type 0 and then 10 again. And now it's turned red. We can see the label up here. So this means whenever this animation plays, it will animate this number to be 10. The alternative is we can also just animate this checkbox on and off. Either works, but if we animate this number, we have more control over like the rate of how much we want to shoot. Let's say we want to like animate it from 0 to 10 or anything, but that's more advanced. We'll just leave it at 10 when on. Let's copy this frame here. We can see this frame 1. We'll just select it, it'll turn blue, hit Ctrl C to copy it. We can go out of recording, preview, go to shooting off, click, and Ctrl V to paste it in. And we'll have it here again. And for this, we'll just, since this is the off animation, we want this to be 0. So the particle doesn't play anymore. And that's it for those two animations. Now we can also just turn this to 0 again, so it doesn't constantly play there. Now we want to create an animation for the shotgun particle. Now the thing that is different when it comes to burst particles is we can't animate this number on and off. That actually won't work. What we can do is we can animate the object on and off, and then every time the object is turned on, the particle will play. It'll play because this little setting called play on awake is toggled on. So every time the object is turned on, basically, that means the particle will play. But there's a downside to that. Let's say we turn the particle on, boop, and it's currently in the air, but we get to the off animation. This turns the object off, but oh no, this actually means all the currently emitting particles in the world will also disappear. Now let's say we don't really want that. We don't want the particles to disappear. We want them to continue while we animate this. Now, the way to get around this is to create something called a buffer particle. And what it does is it gets around this issue here. So let's create this buffer particle. We'll create a new particle effect. We'll turn it this way here. Let's make it 0. 90. Okay. We'll go to shape 0, 0, 0, lifetime 1, start speed 0.1, max particles 1, not rate over time, we'll make it a burst of 1, and we'll turn off the renderer so it is invisible. And that's technically our buffer particle. We'll call it buffer shotgun. And what we'll do now is we'll go to the subemitters, and on birth we will subemit the shotgun particle. Unity will ask us, hey, we should repound this because it's now a child of it, or it's being subemitted so it should be a child. We'll just say yes, repound it, and then immediately ignore Unity's recommendation and just drag it out again. Now every time we click restart on the buffer, it'll play our particle. It's currently aiming the wrong way, so let's rotate it until it shoots the correct way. Boom, boom, boom. And now we can see every time we click restart, it'll no longer delete these because it's being subemitted. And what we'll do to animate it is we'll turn the buffer on and off. And because we're turning the buffer off instead of the actual particle, they will never be deleted. They will always exist. It's a little confusing. Just trust me on this. But it'll basically look like this when we start animating it. One little important thing now that we use a buffer is the shotgun particle will always be on now, but we also don't want it to play on awake. So we'll just select them and turn play on awake off, because the buffer will do the playing on awake for us. Okay, so let's create the animation for it now. Create animation shotgun on. Control D to duplicate it. F2 to rename it. Shotgun off. Let's select both of these. Drag them on the avatar in the hierarchy. Click the avatar. Find the animation window. Shoot shotgun on. Click record. We'll find the buffer particle now, and we'll simply record it being on. And in this case, we'll just toggle it on, off and on. And that's it for that one. Then we'll go to the off animation and turn it off. A little smart thing to do here, if we go to the on animation again, let's have it off on the first frame and on the second frame. So it looks like this. This just means that if we transition from the on animation to another on animation, it'll actually toggle it again, because it'll go off on instead of just being on, which on won't do anything new, but off on will. And we can get out of this and then we can just turn off the buffer here. Now we actually have both our particles ready to be applied to the avatar. So let's make some toggles for them. We'll click the avatar, open the parameters, and let's make two new parameters. We'll have them both be bulls. So we'll click add, they'll be bulls by default. We'll have one for shooting and one for shotgun. We won't have them saved, I don't think that's necessary. They'll be defaulted to be off as well. We'll check these off, but we want synced to be on. Okay, now that we have the parameters there, let's click the avatar again. Open our effects controller by clicking it. Find the parameters tab, and then we add the exact same two bulls in here. So click plus and add two bulls. And I copy pasted the shooting, and we'll type in the shotgun as well. Ensure that the naming is the exact same, as well as capitalization. Then finally we can go to layers, and we'll create a new layer for each. 2 layers here. We'll click the cog and put the weight to 1, so the layer is active. Let's rename them to shooting and shotgun, so we know which is which. And let's lock this window here so it doesn't go anywhere for now. And go back and find our animations, the particle folder. Let's see, we're currently in the shooting layer, so let's take these shooting animations and drag them in to here. Put this there. Okay, so this is just like any other toggle. If you don't know how toggles work, this is how. We have an off and on animation, and if we click here, we can right click, make transition, and drag an arrow to the on animation. This arrow helps us define how we get to the other animation. Now, by default, it has all these things checked on. In our case, we want to turn off exit time and transition duration to 0. And then we want to figure out what's the condition for this to be on. Let's say the condition is new bool. Fix that real quick. B, C. I think that's what they're called. And okay, click arrow. We want to find the toggle first. So this is the shooting bool. So this condition checks is our shooting ball turned on, we'll make a menu button for that. But let's also say we want to make a fist while that toggle is on to shoot. To check for a fist, and it's in our right hand, we choose gesture right. Now, in case you don't have this parameter as an option here, you can go in and add it. It's usually default, but if you don't have it, you click plus, add an integer, scroll down and find it, call it gesture right. I already have it, so it'll be duplicate. And you can also add a gesture left. Now on VRChat avatars, a gesture right equals 1 is a fist. And number 2 would be an open hand. And number 3 would be a pointing finger. And number 4 would be a peace sign. 5 would be rock and roll. 6 would be a gun. And 7 would be a thumbs up. In our case, we want to check for a fist. Let's say we want to do a fist to shoot. Okay, then we also want to define how do we get to the off animation. So let's think about it. We're currently in the on animation. How do we stop? Well, we can either turn this off. We can either turn the toggle shooting to false, or new transition. We are also checking if we are not doing the fist anymore. So we do another transition and stack it on top. It'll create these little 3 arrows. With condition, gesture right is not equal to 1. That means any gesture but a fist. So if we're either not doing a fist or if the toggle is off, then the particle will also be off. Alright, let's go for the shotgun now. We'll find the animations we had. Shotgun. Drag them in. Let's also really quick hit Ctrl S to save the project. Very important, it could crash at any time. It is Unity after all. For our shotgun, we want to make a transition. Turn off exit time, transition duration. Go to condition, and we'll have the shotgun is true. We want that to be true. And we want to do a fist as well for this. So gesture right equals 1. To go back, it is either shotgun is not true, or we are no longer doing a fist like before. So gesture right not equal. So gesture right not equal a fist, which is 1. Okay, now those are done. We can go to the scene here. Finally, we want to add the settings, rather the toggles in our menu so we can do them. So click the avatar, under the expressions menu, open them, and let's just do it under my hair and accessories menu. Open it, double click it, plus and plus. We have shooting. We'll make it a toggle. Give it the parameter shooting. Let's say we have the shotgun here. We'll have a toggle and call it shotgun. We could also give it some icons, but there's nothing really I want to add there. And that's pretty much it. If you have Gesture Manager, which you can download through VCC, and then when you have it, you can click Gesture Manager Emulator and it'll create a little object here. You can test the whole thing you've made in Unity. So let's enter play mode. Alright, we go into play mode, click Gesture Manager, and now the avatar will stand there. Now if we go to Tools, we can pose the avatar just so we can get the hand to point upwards. Let's go to the armature, upper arm, let's just point it a little bit outwards there. Click Gesture Manager again. Go to expressions. I had it on the hair and accessories. Let's go to shooting. So now shooting is on. And if we go to right hand, gesture fist. And now we can see it's shooting. If we turn it off here, the particles will go away. Or if we no longer do a fist. If we go to shotgun, we do a fist, it'll shoot once, then it will turn off. We can also spam it, and it'll shoot a bunch of them. Fantastic, they work perfectly actually. Right, we can go out of play mode. Now that's pretty much it. You can build upon this knowledge. But I want to also show you how you can make this into a prefab that you can put on other avatars. This is like entirely optional, but let's do it. We have our particle folder here. We can delete this controller again. We don't need it anymore. We're done animating. Delete that. And let's just be good Samaritans and organize stuff. So let's create a couple folders. Folder. We'll have one for particles. We'll shift click and select them and just drag them in. Create another folder. We'll call it animations. And shift click and drag them all in there. Now, since we were smart and made the whole thing a pan constraint to the hand, we don't have to worry about the animations breaking when putting on other avatars. But let's take this thing, drag it into here, take this whole thing, and then drag it into our folder there, and it creates a little prefab. This will turn blue again. Let's just hit Control Z until it's back to normal. Boom, like that. Now what we can see is if we drag this back in again, we have an exact duplicate of the whole thing we made. Perfect. So now we have the hierarchy stuff. We will need the effects controller animations and the parameters as well. So let's click our avatar, find the effects controller by clicking it once. It'll take us to where it is in the folder. I'll hit Control D to duplicate it. We have an FX1 now. Let's drag it in between here so we can get to the assets folder, and then drag it into our particle folder. I'm gonna rename it to particle FX. I'm gonna open it by double clicking and just ensure that lock is off, so we're in the actual correct one. Lock is off. So we're in this one. And we kind of want to just delete everything but the two related things, shooting and shotgun. So I'll click here, hit the delete key. Click, 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 click. Just like that. And up here we can just delete all the parents by holding the delete key until it gives us a warning. We click away from the warning. Click the next one, hold delete until it gives us another warning. And we'll just cross out of that one. Now I have only the related stuff. Good. Finally, we want the parameters by clicking the avatar. Click parameters, and here it is. I'll duplicate it, and I'll drag it over here again into a particle folder. Let's call it particle param. And now we want to delete everything except these two. And we just do this. Delete, delete, delete. Okay, and that's done. We also want the menu toggles, let's say. So for that, we can open our menu. It was under the hand accessories, so we can take that. We can duplicate that, or we can create a new one with them, but let's just duplicate it. We'll drag it in here into our particles. We'll call it particle menu. And let's delete all the unrelated toggles. Delete, delete. And here we are. Only the two related toggles. And that's kind of all you need for a prefab. Because now, let's say that this is a fresh avatar project. This one doesn't exist, it's not here. With Avatar 3.0 Manager, which you can download through VCC, we can open this. We can drag our avatar in. We can click Effects, add animator to merge. We can drag this in here. and we can merge on current, then we'll have the effect controller. Under parameters, we can take the parameters, click copy parameters, and then we'll have the parameters. We can simply drag this menu into a submenu on our avatar. And finally, we can drag the prefab directly onto our hierarchy. We already have one, but let's do that. Let's just delete it quick. Okay, so we can drag the prefab onto our hierarchy. We can unpack it, and then drag the hand target onto our hand, like so. So it's back on the hand. And then essentially it'll work on that avatar, assuming this thing is moved to the end. And that's kind of how you both make particles and a prefab. The final thing it would be exporting it. So in this case, to export the whole thing, I would right click this folder, click export package, just turn off this one, and just have the particle folder here. I'll export it to a folder, call it particle unity package, and then I have it here. And you can simply just drag this into your project. It will say nothing to pod because we already have it in our project. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll try and answer. You can join my Discord server if you have more technical questions, and I'll be happy to help as much as I can here and there. But I hope this has helped you out in your journey of creation for VRChat. Alright, I hopped quickly in game with the avatar I uploaded on to check the particles. Let's enable the shooting particle and do a fist. And we can see it shoots out, as expected. And if I stop doing a fist, it'll stop. If I toggle it off, it'll also stop. Shotgun. Works fine. Bang, 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 bang.